Okay, welcome everyone this morning. My name's Todd. I'm the Executive Director from Alberta. So those of you from Ontario, I'm sort of Anya and Ingrid rolled into one. Those of you in BC, I basically do the same things Tara does. So welcome to our semi-regular LARE discussion and prep sessions. This session is being recorded today, so please keep that in mind. Anything you type, say, put on a screen, share, will be recorded into the meeting and will be potentially shared on YouTube later. Not always do we share them, but sometimes we do. Other than that, really important, do keep yourself muted. It makes for a much more seamless experience for everyone. However, if you need to talk, unmute, ask a question, however Justin sets that section of this up. Also, if you're not logged in, Molly, Nathan, Justin, you're gonna get a lot more out of this if you're fully connected to the software. There is visuals, there are chat groups. If you're just listening on your phone, you're not going to see everything. So it'll be really important that you maybe find a device and jump in all the way. You don't have to disconnect, you can just add that as well. Other than that, thanks so much to Justin from out in Ontario for taking today's session on. Just like always, each of these is a little bit different, so Justin will sort of give you kind of the context and rules he's going to work within. And I'm going to stay in the background. If you're having technical issues, if you need something minor, send me a private message, and I will do my best to keep an eye on that as I go and provide you tech support without disrupting the whole group. Other than that, I'm going to turn this over to Justin, and I'm going to get out of the way.
Awesome, thanks, Todd. So good morning, everyone. As Todd mentioned, my name is Justin Whelan. I'm a landscape architect here in Ontario. I'm sure those in Ontario who have been to various OLA events may know me, have my head around there and in and around. But for those in Alberta and BC, welcome. So I'm a landscape architect in Kitchener, just outside of Toronto, at a firm called GSP Group, Urban Planning and Landscape Architects. So let's get this session started. Thank you for joining. I know we've, of course, the LAREs have sections 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm not sure if most people here have gone through the initial intro or not, but I was just going to maybe do a quick run through for those who this is their very first session of joining in, of an intro to joining Carb. So without further ado, I will kind of jump right into the registering for the exam, becoming part of Carb. So the first thing that you'll want to do when setting this up, and apologies if you already know this, but I'll go through this quite quickly. So you'll want to start your council record with Carb, so that this will allow you to begin signing up for LAREs or LAREs, and it's required. So you'll just go onto the Carb website. If you, as I mentioned, if you haven't, you'll just click to register. You'll fill out your information, where you're from, and then once you've done that, there is an application fee. It's $160 American. So I was just looking that up before the meeting. That roughly works out to be 215 Canadian, I believe. So you'll need to pay that. That's the initial application fee, and then you'll need to pay that again as an annual fee every year while you're taking the LAREs to hold your Carb council record. However, if you don't plan on working in the United States, you won't need to continue that once you're done your LAREs. So definitely you'll need to keep that up while doing the LAREs, but once you're done and don't plan on going to the United States to practice, you will not need to keep your Carb council records, because each of your respective associations, for Ontario, for instance, they hold all your LARE records, so you do not need to keep the council record as well, which is very nice. So anyways, I'm kind of jumping ahead there, but back to once you've completed the registration, you're now open to taking any of the LAREs that you'd like. So it's really deciding on what you want to take, how comfortable you feel with the material. Of course, the sections, as I mentioned, are 4. The first one is project and construction management. Section 2 is inventory and analysis. Section 3 is design. And finally, section 4 is grading, drainage, and construction documentation, or documents, sorry. So once you've decided to take one, you will select which one you want. You'll go through the process of purchasing that exam. The first 2, and I should have prefaced at the very beginning, and I'll kind of preface this at the beginning of each section. It's been a little bit of time since I've written the LAREs, not a ton of time, but so some of the information that I may have in terms of pricing and whatnot, however, for the application fee and annual fee, I just looked up, the prices of the exams may have changed since I took them. But anyways, the first 2 are a little less, and then I want to say that they were, I think, around $500 each, and then the last 2 were towards the $750 or something like that. So they are more expensive, but anyways, you'll pay for them. Once you've done that, CLARB will send you an email notifying that you have signed up for the exam, and that you will need to pick a testing center where to write your exam. I believe it's always Pearson View, so look up the nearest Pearson View testing center that's near you, and then select a time slot as to when you want. There's morning and afternoon sessions, so whichever you feel best on, do it. They generally run all through the week and on Saturdays as well. So it's really when you want to take it, depending on your workload, and if your work will allow you to take a day off. I know some firms will give their employees the day off to go write the exam, or afternoon or morning or whatever it may be, or if you feel more comfortable doing it on a weekend, you can do that too. It's really up to you. So anyways, now that you've signed up for everything, you're now into studying, which is why you're here. So there's lots of opportunities available for studying. The CLARB recommended reading list, of course, as I'm sure hopefully some of you have looked at, or through the orientation guide. They have that in there, along with a ton of other helpful information. So in terms of Ontario, we have the OLA library. I'm sure, or I can't say, but I'm sure the Alberta and BC associations have their own resources or libraries that you can take books out, or hopefully that may be on the CLARB reading list that otherwise may be difficult, or you may not want to obtain right away, but they're available through that. Find them out, read them. There's also the LARE study groups. The OLA has one. We have a LARE study group that's just for the OLA. There is also a CLARB North America-wide study group that you can join as well, which each of them have a ton of resources and forums for people such as yourselves, all members to share things, share thoughts, or helpful tips, or if they have a question on things, you can throw that in there too. And someone will generally post a response or be helpful and create a discussion. There are moderators, such as like the associate representatives in Ontario for the OLA, who kind of run with the study group to help answers. And then, of course, any member is welcome to post answers as well. And then, of course, these study sessions, which are very helpful because it's individuals like myself and as well as you guys too, to provide opportunities to provide input for the rest of the members to avenues or opportunities to study things that they may not have thought of before, so things like that. And then finally, you've taken the time to study. Now you're actually going to be taking the exam. And as I mentioned, they're held at the Pearson View testing centers. So when going to take the exam on the day of, you always want to make sure you arrive early, just in terms of, any kind of situation, whether it be traffic getting there, signing in, there may be an issue, you have to call CLARB. Generally, this stuff doesn't happen in terms of that kind of signing in process. There's no real issues there. But it is always good to arrive early. They generally say about half an hour. And then sometimes if all goes smoothly, which it always usually does, or at least in my experience and those that I know of, they'll sometimes let you in a little early to write the exam if you want, which is nice because you generally want to get the exam over with. Always bring 2 forms of ID. Definitely, driver's license, health card, or even a Visa, some sort of credit card, just to give your identification, which is fantastic. And then everything that you need for the exam is given to you. You will not need to bring anything in with you, and they'll make sure that you can't. There's lockers there. I mean, generally it's good to not bring really anything in with you, but in terms of personal items, they do have lockers there that they'll allow you to store your stuff safely without anyone taking it from you. And they always have people watching it over, so you're good there. But yeah, you won't be able to take in anything like wristwatches or cell phones, of course, or any kind of device like that. Only glasses if you need to wear them. And then they kind of go through the process of signing you in. Once that's all done, you write your exam. The first 2 are 2.5 hours, I believe. Third one is 3.5 hours. And then the fourth one is about 4 hours. So they can be a good chunk of time. So make sure you're prepared, ready to go. They will give you, you do not get allotted breaks for your the longer exams, say for 3 and 4. You can take breaks. That's just the clock will still run. So it's good to make sure you have while you're writing the exam. It is good to maybe step out for a bit, but just be conscious of that your time is still running. So yeah, that's really it in terms of actually taking the exam on the day of. So once you've taken the exam, you'll leave, you'll get a confirmation notice about that. And generally now when I was writing, they would mostly say that it took about, I think 4 to 6 weeks, they would say. And generally it ended up being about 6 weeks when they would finally deliver the results. And that was just so Carb could take all the exams in and kind of review them to see, hey, is there any questions that were really not, if a lot of people failed them, then they kind of take that into account and they'd maybe eliminate that from the exam so it wasn't really taken away from people's marks and things like that. Not sure how that quite works right now. I think that's about the same. However, I have heard that the exam results are released a little bit earlier, which is definitely a nice thing because it can be, I don't know if taxing is the right word, but it can be a little bit of a bit of a process to have to wait that long to figure out what your results are. So anyways, generally in that time, you'll get an email about to go check on the Carb website. You'll go to your council record and you'll be able to check your exam results. If you passed, it'll just say you passed and you have a 0, which means you passed. However, if you did not pass, Carb rates their exams as if you have to have over a 650 to pass. Anything under a 650 is a fail, which is then they'll give you a number under 650 of kind of where you ranged in there of how well you did. Unfortunately, they do not provide feedback as to how you did an exam, where you did wrong or what you did right, which is kind of can be frustrating when say you've really you've done everything, studied everything you can think of, and followed all the steps from the Carb recommended reading list and from what we've talked about on here and other various studying tips. But anyways, they will not. So that's definitely a little bit of a frustrating thing, but you just kind of got to press through. But hopefully that won't be the case. However, don't be discouraged if you do fail. It happens to us all. I know I've experienced it, unfortunately, but it is the way sometimes with these exams. Sometimes it can be a little bit of luck, and it is a lot of studying. You do need to put that in, but there can be a little bit of luck behind that. So anyways, I digress. So if you pass the exam, that's fantastic. Congratulations. And so final step and moving towards full licensure, you'll want to have 3 exams completed along with your professional development program to be able to call yourself a full landscape architect or full certified landscape architect. And then to get your seal, you'll want to do 4 and then complete all the exams and then have your PDP process completed. Now that's for Ontario. I'm not 100% sure if that's the same in terms of the exams are the same, but the PDP process or the professional development process, I'm not sure exactly for Alberta or BC. It might be similar. If it's a little bit different, I apologize. I'm not quite sure, but make sure to check with your association on kind of that other side of things that you need to do to get your full certification. So in terms of CLARB and for studying that kind of related to this process, that's really kind of the majority of that. I think that's pretty much it. So that wraps up, I believe, the intro. If there's any question, oh, sorry, I kind of had the chat hidden by the PDF I was writing while trying to kind of keep an eye on things, and I actually had it over the chat, so I'm just looking at there. So, Todd mentioned everyone in BC, you can progress with 3 if you don't need a stamp. In Alberta, you need all 4. Okay, so thanks, Todd, I appreciate that. And then also, instant results are being tested now. As supported. Okay, so Todd also mentioned that instant results are being tested now and supposed to go live this year at some point. So that's fantastic. Thank you also for that, Todd. And I'll keep my chat open a little bit better to see those things as they roll in. Before I move on to section 1, does anyone have any questions on the LARE CLARB kind of sign-in process? And apologies once again if the majority of you here listening in so far have already gone through this, but anyways. Hearing none. So we have a question. Is there any push to change showing results regarding a pass-fail? From Janelle. That's a good question. I know that was kind of something that I always wanted to look into when I was the associate rep on council and going through my LAREs, because it is a frustrating process to, especially if you failed once and then you write it again, you failed a second time. It's like, where do I go from here, or what do I change? And as Todd mentioned, it damages the integrity of the exam. I don't think their CLARB is open to that. At one point, they did allow you to pay for, when it was handwritten out, you could pay to get your red lines back, which I heard was helpful, but again, that was an expensive process. So I think they've really changed that, especially with it being all digital now. So I think it is them trying to keep the integrity of the exam. I know that doesn't help, and it would be nice to have some sort of feedback. But all I can say, and through personal experience of failing, you just kind of have to keep at it, and it will work out. Even though it does feel discouraging, it will go your way. All right. Seeing none else, let's jump into section 1. So section 1, as mentioned, I'm just going to pull this up. So section 1, project and construction management. So I'm going to share my screen momentarily. 1 second. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see this. I'm sharing the section 1, it's project construction management PDF that myself and that myself and another of my associate reps back when we were associate reps on OLA, kind of crafted together the it's a kind of a Coles notes if you want, or like a kind of a cut sheet of the main points of section 1. And we've done these for all the exams. So as I progress through, I'll bring up them for each exam. But being section 1, we'll start with section 1, of course. So the first one that we broke the exam down through Carb's recommendation, or how they've broken it down in their orientation guide and their section 1. So 10% is for pre-project management, 30% is project management, 20% is bidding, 30% is construction, and 10% is maintenance. So those are all good things to keep in mind when studying and reviewing things for section 1. So let's go through the Carb reading list. So for the Carb's recommended reading list, they have Professional Practice of Landscape Architecture by Rogers, Construction Contracts for Edition Hines, Project Management for Design Professionals, Ramroth, and Sustainability and Design Ethics by Russ. So when I was going through this section, which I will say was a number of years ago now, probably about 5 years ago now. So apologies, I'm a little rusty, but what I found was the kind of holy grail, or the main book you really wanted to study for this exam was Construction Contracts, 3rd edition by Hines. And I don't know if I just stopped sharing for a second. I'm going to share. I'll share my screen. What I'm going to do is, in case you don't know what it looks like, is it looks like this book, the Construction Contracts. So that's what the book looks like if you weren't familiar with it. Yes, like I said, it's the book you would really want to read for section 1. I read it. It is a dry read, but it really hits on everything you need for this exam. Everything that you'll want to know, and touches on everything regarding project management and construction contracts is in here. And it gives lots of really helpful exams at the end of each chapter to kind of put into practice what you just learned in that chapter, which I found really helpful for the exam, to kind of put it in perspective, and that you can kind of think back on when writing the exam and going through those questions and thinking, when you're reading a question you're not quite sure, and then think back to the one of the examples in the book that will really help with it. So yeah, I found that extremely helpful. I know I didn't actually read the other recommended reading lists, or the other books on it. I have heard Professional Practice for Landscape Architecture is helpful. I have heard that they are all fairly helpful books. So it really ends up what you want to read personally. And of course, you can't read every book. You have to kind of pick and choose what you want to read. So really focus on things. 1 second, I'm just going to pull the chat. Oh, thank you, Nathan. Yes, so Liz, the PDFs for these are on the OLA Google group. For those in Alberta and BC, I think you're welcome to join our OLA study group to gain access from it. However, I can always make these available to Todd, and I believe it's Tara at BC, so that you can also access them, these documents from them as well. So we'll make sure that these are available to everyone. So anyways, jumping around. So anyways, I found construction contracts the most helpful, but it's really what you want and what you have time for. Like I was saying, you can't read everything, but focus on certain things, maybe focus on 2 books. So then we'll jump into additional resources. So the Practice of Landscape Architecture in Canada, have it here. At University of Guelph for the BLA program, this was one of the books for the professional practice class that we had at the time, written by James Taylor. I found it was pretty helpful, and that was one of the other books I read for this exam. Keep in mind, if you are going to use the book, the half of it is pertaining to Canada, which you won't need to look at. Just disregard that for studying purposes. Of course, out of interest, feel free to read. But for studying purposes, you won't need to study that for the exam because, of course, this is a North America-wide testing system. They're not specifically focused on well, they don't focus on anything pertaining specifically to Canada or the United States. So don't worry about that. Read the later half that pertains more to project management and construction contracts. The AIA standards, construction or general conditions of the contract for construction is another one. Canadian Construction Association, a guide on standard contracting and bidding procedures. So those are other additional resources that I would recommend. Maybe look into them. I think one best thing to do is kind of go through all these, what we recommend here, and maybe take a look at them and see where you're maybe thinking you're, I don't know, struggling is the right word, but maybe areas that you feel a little bit weaker on or that you need a little more to look into, and other areas that you're feeling comfortable with. And see where there's, flip through the table of contents and see where they may have a little bit more information, and then focus on those. Other great additional resource, and this goes for all the exams, is the LARE prep exams. And there's 2 exams. It's not provided by Carb, but they are excellent resources I've found. I didn't utilize them for when I was writing Section 1. I don't know if they were available at that time, but they are available now. And I have heard great things. If they're anything like the other sections which I've utilized them for, they're definitely worthwhile. I have written 15 here, but I don't think it is 15 anymore. I think they've upped the price. I'm not sure exactly what that is. Maybe $20, maybe a little bit more. And of course, that's American again, so always keep in mind the Canadian exchange rate. But again, helpful exams. One of the great things about the LARE prep exams is it's like you're writing an actual LARE, Carb LARE exam, in that you are timed. It gives you a time limit that counts down. It's very similar in terms of how the questions are laid out. Going through the questions, you can flag them. And things like that that you can go back and review. And probably one of the best things about the exam, these LARE prep exams, are that once you've completed the exam, if you get a question wrong, it'll tell you it's wrong, and that it'll give you the explanations to why certain questions were wrong, and then why the correct answer is right, which is definitely helpful to review that, and then you know that from moving on. So definitely a great resource there. And then I have written here the OILA Google group and the LARE overall North America, as I mentioned earlier, the overall LARE Google group as well. They're great. Lots of resources there. In terms of the OILA Google group, we have a lot of I don't know if we have Jimmy Hines on there, the PDF, I don't think so, but a lot of other textbooks we do have available as PDFs, and other people would put up things on there, or just other information bits. They're very helpful, and if you have any questions, feel free to throw those up on there, which is definitely fantastic. And the other additional resource that I would recommend is the pull it up quickly. So yes, it is 2013. So it's an example exam provided by Carb, and I have these for each of the exams. We share them within the OLA. So while they're older, they're still very relevant. And again, it's just like a Carb exam, except without the digital piece. It doesn't tell you, it tells you the right answer. It doesn't tell why and why the other ones are wrong. But anyways, this is another great resource because some of these questions you'll actually find on the exam. So these are on the OLA Google group. If they're not, put a post on there and I'll get notified, or the current OLA associates will be notified, and we'll make sure that you can get those. If you're in Alberta or BC, you're always welcome to shoot me or Todd an email, and we can probably get those to you somehow, for sure. No problem there. But again, another fantastic resource there. So in terms of exam reflections, this one being solely, it's an interesting exam in that it's very term-based. Like, you have to kind of know like the terms and their definitions is a big part of this. It's not really maybe application. There is a little bit of application, but there's a lot of knowing key terms. Like, you know, legal, types of bonds, types of schedules, types of contracts, knowing all of those, like what that term is and then what it means is really key for this exam. So right here we have flashcards for those kind of things. I personally didn't do that, but I know a lot of friends that did do that, and that was really helpful for them. For me, it was writing them out, which is essentially like flashcards, but it really is really based on your own experience and your own studying practices of what feels comfortable for you. So do what feels right to you, and whatever works for you, memorizing those and getting those in your head, whether it be flashcards or just writing them down or reading, do whatever is comfortable to you, but make sure that you do review those key terms and go over those things. Another key thing is really understanding the bidding and project process. So, you know, RFPs, tenders, meetings, contract administration, all those things, and what is within those things. So what's within the tender, and like, you know, the forms of tender and you know, like the front end of you know, the tender and specs and things like that. All good things to know. Also know the roles and responsibilities of all players involved with construction or contract administration. You know, your owners, the owners' representatives, contractors, the client, all those different things are very crucial to know for this exam. And then finally, on the back of the sheet, or on the next page, however you'd like to do it, is we took section 1, and so at the very top where we had it kind of broken down, we've done that again, and then through what Carb had for each of these items, so for pre-project management, and then there's a bunch of things like select project team, develop contract, negotiate contract, prepare RFPs and RFQs, and then determine project scope, schedule, and budget. So what we've done on this page is that's taken away from Carb, and we put it onto the back of this page for the cut sheet. But what we've done is we've bolded certain areas that at the time, and that I know are still relevant, that me and my partner, Trish, we went through with our other friends that were writing around us or that had recently written, and asked them, out of all these things that Carb has given, where do you feel were really prominent, or, you know, really highlighted or focused on through the exam? And we kind of collected that information from ourselves and from other people, and what we did here is we bolded some of those things. So, like, for instance, in pre-project management, for the 10% of that's on the exam, we found that determining project scope, schedule, and budget was one of the key items that was found on the exam, and that you might want to, you know, kind of look into a little bit further. And of course, keep that in mind. Like, so for instance, project management and construction make 60% of the exam, 30% each. And so they, of course, have more items below them, and then we have more bolded items. So those are the things that you're really going to want to focus on. But the pre-project management and bidding and maintenance, they are still important things that you'll need to review too, even though they're 10%. Good to look at all these things, but maybe focus on the ones that we bolded here as kind of, this is from at least our experience. Now, I can't guarantee that these are definitely going to be on your exam when you go to write, but from our experience, these are what we found to be critical and really, as I mentioned, prominent throughout the exam. So our recommendation is to look at these items and really study there. But of course, make sure you look over everything just so you're well prepared, because you never know. That's Carb. They love to throw in some doozies sometimes that, you know, it's like, really, these I didn't think this was going to be a part of the exam, which, and I maybe should have started this too, doesn't really matter, but it can come in any time, is that be aware that Carb, and I don't know if they still do this, and I think they do because they're always testing new exam questions, that at some point in the exam or throughout the exam, they will throw in, I can't remember how many exactly it is, but they'll throw in at least 10, maybe between 5 and 10 questions that don't have any weight to the exam and that don't have. All right, perfect. Thanks, Todd. Yes, 10% of the questions, that was why I was thinking 10. 10% of the questions are test questions that are not scored. So Clark puts this in there as kind of their example questions to see how they fare and then using them for future exams. So definitely keep that in mind when you're writing the exam, but don't let it, you know, you always want to answer the questions as best as possible, of course, because you never know what question is going to be the test question. Sometimes you might be able to think, you know, this has nothing to do with the exam, so that probably is a good suggestion as to why that won't be a part of the exam or the specific exam, but still just good to be aware of. And another thing that I'll mention about the exams, and I'll keep mentioning this as I progress through just in case people join in later, is sometimes Carb will kind of put a bunch of questions at the beginning to kind of and along with these types of 10% questions that aren't scored, to kind of throw you off your game a little bit. And I don't think it's not malicious or anything like that, but I think definitely, you know, just don't let it stress you out or kind of throw you off your game. If you don't know it, flag it and come back to it. Don't let it throw you off. It's not the end of the world. There's a ton more questions to come that once you get into a groove and you feel comfortable, that'll really help. And then you can come back to it and you probably will feel comfortable to answer that question. Another helpful tip is what I found too is certain questions. So say you come across a question towards the beginning and you're not really sure of it, so you flagged it and you keep going on in the exam. Another question will come up that you know the answer to, but then you kind of think back to that question that you didn't know earlier, and it helps answer that question. So it doesn't always happen. I'm not saying you'll always find that, but sometimes there are questions that kind of help each other out that will help you out. So, you know, keep aware of that too, and that would be another helpful tip that I would give there. So anyways, I won't go through everything here, or I won't go through all the bolded items on this back sheet for section 1, but that's, you know, take a look through that, and should you have any questions, again, feel free to post on the forum, or as Todd has put into the chat, he's created chats for each of these sections that hopefully people will utilize. It sounds like it's a great resource for people to start building on, where they can post stuff, questions or helpful tips or tricks. So it's kind of like what we've done with OLA, but this sounds like it's next level. So I would definitely recommend maybe checking that out moving forward. So thank you, Todd, for starting those up. I think that's great. But yeah, that I think really, I know that maybe kind of a quick run through on section 1, but that's kind of my experience on that, and then some of those helpful suggestions. So I'll kind of leave it there. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to voice that now, or throw something in the chat. However, if I don't hear anything, that I can continue moving on. But I'll give a little bit for people to throw something if they want to ask any questions. So Nathan writes, maybe the scoring. So, sorry, Nathan, what do you mean about the scoring?
Just give me 1 second. I'm just gonna figure out what I'm saying.
No problem, that's all right. We have time, there's no rush. Like, are you meaning like, so each of those, how it's broken down, like 10, 30, 20, 30,
So,
10, or whatever it was, so like how that's broken out in the scoring?
I'm just on the Carb website, and so it's a pass or fail. 650 is the benchmark, right? Over
Yeah.
pass or fail. So, and what Carb gives you is your number under 650, or if it's just a pass, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So if it's under the number 650, they'll give you a number, say 450, and you can look at the ruler, or I don't know how to describe it. It's a fascinating graphic that I'm looking at that they have on.
No, I do. You know what? I'm just going to try and pull it up myself. Yeah, just 1 second. Sorry, where did you? Oh, how's the LARE scored? There we go. Okay, so yes, their rule. This is quite a graphic, isn't it? So this is the same graphic I remember. It's a very ambiguous scaling system. I mean, they don't really. So if you get under 650, they will give you a number. But I guess that's really what it's trying to do there is, so say you got that 450 or whatever, around that number that you mentioned. I guess that's saying that you were maybe not quite as prepared as you maybe thought. So you were quite far. I don't know if that's really, I'm not 100% sure on, so I'm not sure if that, I guess that kind of does mention that, you know, you were not close, so you really do need to kind of really go back and really study things again. As I mentioned on here, you know, so this is what Carb says. A scaled score of 640, for example, would indicate that a candidate was close to passing. That would really indicate that excuse me, you were right there, which is very unfortunate, and it's happened. I got somewhere close to that once, and it's the most frustrating thing because you really don't know what differently to do. You've studied everything that really tells you that you should have passed in terms of maybe there was one fluke question or something like that. And another recommendation I would give for really any questions is don't overthink or don't second guess yourself. Really go with your gut feeling on things. I think that's really where people may fall down when they fail, is that, you know, you've definitely spent a lot of time studying this and you know the information. It's just that, you know, you're in an environment that is stressful in terms of, you know, you're on the clock, there's a lot riding on this, and you don't want to make a mistake. But So there is a tendency, and I've been there, that you will want to second guess yourself. But, and sometimes, I won't say if it's warranted, sometimes it could be warranted, because you may come to a question and you may really find another question, than the first, and really makes you think, oh, yes, okay, I should go back and change my question. But most cases, if you stick with your original question, I would say, that's the best thing. And that's what a lot of people I've talked to have mentioned as well, is to really stick with your gut feeling. So anyways, I kind of maybe elaborate a little bit more than what you were asking for. And I don't really think I've answered your question, because there really is no solid explanation for this. But I guess that's how I would gauge it, is that if you've come really close to the 650, I know it's hard to keep studying that, and I'm not saying specifically, I'm saying in general. Just keep studying what you study, because it. It was a fluke, and you'll get it the next time. I hopefully that kind of helps. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat too. Okay, so Jessica asked, is the OLA Google group an open group that out-of-province people can access? So Todd, thanks Todd for responding. Usually each province is happy to share, is what Todd responded with, and that's what I'll reiterate as well, is that definitely we're all in this together. That's what I always say. So it's we want to all pass and get it past these layers together, so we all have a common end goal. So we all, we're definitely open to that. If you go to, I'll get to you 1 second to me. So I'm just going to pull up. Okay, so here, everyone, I'm going to post this link. So it's to the OLA, so it's the link to this session for today, but at the bottom of the page, you will see, for more studying support, you'll see for those studying the LARE, we have a helpful resource page on the website here, and I guess I could have just posted that link, so my apologies. But if you go to that link, and I'll just do that right now. So there, the second link there, membership and exam, you will see a bunch of information there. But we also have the link to the OLA LARE study form, or the Google group. So once you click on that link, it'll ask you to not sign in. What's the word I'm looking for? They'll ask you to join. Sorry. Which will then notify the associates to let you into the Google group. It's not a completely open, you have to be accepted in, but we accept, because not random people are just going to join the LARE study group for no good reason. So we always know that those who are joining are landscape architects, or in LA, I should say, landscape architecture, and we'll accept you. And then you have full range and access to put stuff. So I would, go there, Jessica, and you'll find that in everyone. So the next one was Sydney asked, did you use LARE Secrets study guide at all? So Sydney, I did not use the Secret study guide. I know people have, and they found that it was helpful. You have to take it with a bit of grain of salt. So there's some things that kind of seem a little wonky, they said, but for the most part, there was some helpful tips with that. So feel free to use that if you would like. That's definitely another resource. I think there really isn't any exams that, or there really aren't any bad things in terms of that. The only one that I would maybe recommend or hesitate for people to really look into are, and I don't think they have this for section 1 or 2, they have these more for section 3 and 4, are they're called shake and bake exams. So they were the precursor to the LARE prep exams, but they were not good. And I did one, I purchased one, and I do not recommend. There was a lot of wrong or inconsistent questions that didn't seem to fit with section 3 or 4. So I would stay away from those. But yeah, I know people that use the LARE Secret Study Guide, so feel free to use that. Sarah has just also posted, when I was unsure about an answer or thought the question was ambiguous, I wrote out my justification for my answer in the comments for that question. I spent the time on comments after I'd gone through all of the other questions and was reviewing just the ones I was uncertain about. I think the comments help. That's an excellent point, Sarah, and thank you for bringing that up. I generally have brought that up in the past, and I kind of forgot about that, but yes, I completely agree there. If you're unsure of a question or something just doesn't seem right about the question, but you have a gut feeling and you know that you're right in your answer, I completely agree with Sarah. And there's a comment box for every question for you to write anything in terms of write a justification, or if you see something, an error in the question, let Carb know about that, because they may not catch that, but if you catch something, they'll definitely review those things. So I recommend, if you have time, if you're running low on time and you're feeling stressed, don't worry about it. But if you can, I recommend justifying your question. I know I've done it in the past. It also helps yourself run through it. So like in certain questions, you may be unsure, and as you're running, typing it out, your justification, it'll help cement or clarify, really, cement that answer for you that you are right. Or maybe I'll go through it and be like, you know what, actually, as I'm typing and thinking this out a little bit more, I think I'm wrong, and actually it is this other, one of the other answers. So I definitely recommend. So thanks, Sarah, for bringing that up. Okay. I don't think I see anything else. Last chance for, because I know, sorry guys, I think this was slated to be an 1.5-hour meeting. I think we're only on section 1. When I used to run these in the past, they were much longer. So as long as people, if you're only here for section 1, feel free to leave. But if you're here for all of them, great. Or you're just joining us, we'll be moving on to section 2. We'll just taking a little bit of extra time, and hopefully this is helpful for people. So seeing no one else commenting on section 1. Oh, okay, thanks, Todd. Anyways, I don't see anything else about section 1, so we'll end it there. Again, we have Todd posted at the beginning of this chat the link to one of those chat rooms for section 1 for people to utilize. I definitely recommend that. I've also posted the link to the the OLA's exam prep page, which also includes the link to the Google group. So I recommend that. And if anything, contact your local, so like contact Todd, for instance, or Tara or Ingrid, and they'll put you in contact with one of the associate reps or someone that can help you answer your questions. All right, moving on. We'll move on to section 2 now. And I'm going to share that screen because I have that PDF for section 2. Perfect. Okay. So welcome to section 2. This is for inventory and analysis. So I'll do just like what I did last time. We'll kind of go through this cut sheet. I'll give some of my experiences, and then we'll answer any questions you have. So the exam breakdown, as per Carb's orientation guide and how they have it listed on their website, is that 35% is for site inventory, 40% is for physical analysis, and 25% is contextual analysis. So those are the 3 main areas that you need to focus on, especially for, well, the only 3 areas that you need to focus on for this exam. So jumping right into it, we'll talk about the Carb reading list. I guess maybe I should have talked about this too. I guess maybe this, before we get into that, for section 1, the exam is structured as a multiple choice or multiple choice questions. So it'll either be select 1 of 5, or there'll be, select all the above, or select 2 or 3 that best answer this question. So there's things like that. Section 2 is the exact same way. It's just multiple choice or multiple choice answer. That's how this is structured as well. There may be diagrams, but there's nothing like sections 3 and 4 where there's drag and drop and things like that, which we'll get into once we get into section 3. But again, multiple choice answers for section 2. So now we'll jump into the Carb reading list. So the first one is Design with Nature, and that's McHarg. I did not read that book. I heard I believe it is an interesting book. I think it's more of like a coffee table kind of book. A lot of people that I know did not read that book for studying for the exam. They may have kind of glanced through it, but it wasn't a solid study focus for section 2. So that's my recommendation. Site analysis, a contextual approach to sustainable land planning and design. Sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing. I'm going to share my screen again so I can show you what that book looks like. So for that one, yes. So that's the book there, The Site Analysis, a Contextual Approach to Sustainable Land Planning and Site Design. It's by James LeGros. That is one of the recommended reading lists readings from Carb, and one of the books that I really focused on and I highly recommend. It's very useful. Again, unfortunately, I don't have it in front of me. You can access PDFs online of it, I believe. If not, I think we have it in the OLA Google group. Someone's put it in a Dropbox there for everyone to access, so I definitely recommend that. Or if your local, or if your association's library has it available, feel free to rent it out as well. But yeah, fantastic book. It really goes through a lot of those 3 areas of focus up above in terms of site inventory, physical analysis, and contextual analysis. Again, I will reiterate, go through the table of contents and look at the chapters that seem to go with these 3 categories, and really focus on those chapters. And then any other chapters, I think there's a few in that book. I think I want to say I read the majority of that book, if not all of it. There might be the odd chapter that you can completely skip because it's not pertaining to section 2. But again, look at the table of contents. The next one is Site Planning and Design Handbook, 2nd edition by Russ. And that one is, I think on the top of the screen does not want me to select it. Okay, so this is it here, Site Planning and Design Handbook. Another key book I definitely recommend reading for this exam. Again, just like the book before it, go through the table of contents. I want to say the first bit and then the last bit are very helpful. There are a few chapters that more pertain to design. Actually, sorry, the first half of this book is really about the site analysis that you'll want to review. The last half is pertaining to design, and you'll want to focus on that for section 3. But don't worry about that now. We'll jump into that when we get to section 3. But for section 2, focus on the first part of this design, review the table of contents again, and focus on those chapters or areas that highlight or pertain to the 3 categories as we went over by Carb. And then The Living Landscape, an Ecological Approach to Landscape Planning by Steiner. I think that was a newer one. Within the last couple of years, they added that to the list. But anyways, I did not read that either. I feel free to look at it. I don't know many people that did read that book that I knew that studied for the exam. They're really the two they mostly focused on were the two middle ones, the site analysis and the site plan design handbook. Again, I'll reiterate those are the two you really want to focus on. But feel free to look at the other ones if you have an opportunity and see if they have anything useful. Again, as I mentioned in section 1, you can't read every resource available. It's not always possible, and not only is it not sometimes always possible, but you can't take every bit of information. You just gotta kind of focus on a few and really dive into those and know those well. So that's my recommendation for the Carb reading list. Moving into the additional resources section, the first one is Landscape Planning by Marsh. And I have that book right here. It's yellow. It's got some kind of topography maps on the front. I definitely recommend that book for this one as well. So those are the 3 books that I focused on. Were the first 2 from the Carb reading list, and then this Landscape Planning by Marsh was the 3rd book I really focused on, and it has a ton of great information regarding landscape analysis that you'll want to review in there. Again, you can get it from one of the libraries, or I don't think we have a PDF of it, but double check. It's been some time since I've looked on there in the LARE Google group. Definitely recommend that. Another additional resource that was originally a Carb recommended reading on the recommended reading list, but has since been taken off, is the Basic Elements of Landscape Architectural Design by Booth. I can kind of see why it was taken off. It is a good book. It's got great illustrations, kind of classic hand graphics, landscape architectural style hand graphics by Booth. It's very high level and kind of gives the basics of landscape analysis and design. So if you have a little bit of extra time and you're just kind of looking for something easy to plow through, I'll recommend it. I did look at it myself, but it's not a key book for this exam. Site Planning by Lynch is another one. I didn't look at it. I don't think a lot of people I studied with or that were studying with me used it either, but I think I did also hear that there were some good parts to it. So if you have access to a copy, or if you want to take a look at it, again, go all out and do so, but it's not a key one to look at. Again, the LARE prep exams, I utilized the A and B for section 2 and definitely found them very helpful. So yes, I would recommend utilizing those. They had a lot of great questions on there, and again, if you get them wrong, and it puts you in the mindset of writing an actual LARE. So yeah, it was a very good resource there. Again, we say $15 on here, but I think they're 20 to 25, and that's American. So we factor in the Canadian exchange there too. So they are a little expensive, but in the grand scheme of things, completely worth it. I give my full endorsement for that and recommend them for sure. And one good thing I would recommend for the LARE prep exams is if you have a friend or a couple friends that are studying for them, like say you and a friend are studying for section 2, one by A and the other by B, and then you can swap your usernames. So it makes it a little bit more affordable, and then you're spreading the wealth of studying. So I did that in the past and definitely recommend that. And then finally, once again, the OLA Google group and the overall LARE Google group, North America wide. Lots of great information on there. People will sometimes post about their exam experiences that you'll want to review. Yes, look at them, kind of dive in and see what you find helps you there. We have a question. So Sarah mentioned Booth talked about functional plan diagrams and other types of drawings at different stages of development, which I found were on exam 2. It also talked about certain relationships between objects, paths, plants, etc., that I didn't see in other places. I thought those sections were worth a quick review. So thanks a lot, Sarah. That's a good, that's a great example and great point to make about the basic elements of landscape architectural design by Booth. So, now you mentioning that, I do recall those being in there, and those questions, you will find those kind of questions on section 2, just because of it being inventory and analysis. So yeah, those are definitely worthwhile reviewing. So definitely recommend maybe taking a look at Booth then. Thanks, Sarah. So moving into the exam reflections. So again, there is a lot of reading material, as I mentioned, for this section. It's probably one of the heaviest. So it's hard to, like, for instance, you can dive into so much detail on a lot of these, the site inventory, physical analysis, and conceptual analysis, that it almost will drive you mad if you want to try and, know everything in detail. So as we mentioned here, it's better to focus on the general topics and terms rather than the nitty-gritty of everything. It is good to maybe quickly skim it, but don't kill yourself trying to really review everything in depth, because you'll run out of time and then you won't be able to study everything. So it's better to review everything, solidly on a higher level, because that's really where Carb and the LARE is going to focus on. They may have the odd focus question, but it's not it's not totally that, and I wouldn't worry about that. As we mentioned here, definitely focus on the general terms and topics. Like, for instance, one example is that there in landscape planning, for instance, you can talk a lot about storm, like water infiltration and things like that, and groundwater and runoff and things like that, that you can just almost go down a rabbit hole of information. While interesting, you don't need to know every single thing about that for this exam, just some general terms and ideas and high-level stuff, as mentioned. Next, be able to distinguish between inventory analysis. So that is, it is the exam. I know that it might seem kind of blatantly obvious, but it is really good to keep in mind when studying for this exam. So which process does what? So really knowing what the difference is between inventory analysis, because sometimes questions can be how they're worded on the layers, which is definitely something that you need to keep in mind and really read those questions while you're taking the exam. Is they can put one word in there that if you read it quickly and you don't really, you're in the groove of answering questions and you just don't take that extra bit of time to reread the question, might sound like an inventory question, but it could actually be an analysis. So know your differences between the two, what process does what, as mentioned, and really read those questions on the layers. Definitely reading all questions at least twice is, I definitely recommend that for sure, because sometimes you'll read it once and then you'll read it again and you're like, oh, actually I drew that from the question, or didn't notice that before. Types of soils, definitely good to look at your soils for this question. All of these books, especially Marsh, will talk about soils. You don't need to know like every nitty-gritty again about it, but just high-level soils is look into that for sure. Sustainable design, benefits of brownfield development, urban trees, buffers, shade, like urban heat island effects and things like that. All good things to know for this exam. Knowing a little bit about all of those for this would be great. Hydrology was one that we found to be important on this exam. So wetlands, the different types of wetlands, runoff, and then like algae blooms and things like that, like, things in runoff, groundwater, point source, infiltration, aquifers, those kind of things are really prominent on this exam. So definitely look into those things. Again, high level, don't, definitely maybe look in a little bit extra into each of them, but you don't have to know every single little thing about each of those items. Just high stuff. Microclimate is a big one on this one as well, so definitely review that. And interestingly enough, the public consultation process, I found in a few of these, I found in this exam, there was some questions about that. So benefits of gaining the public's feedback for project analysis and better informing the design process. So that's kind of what this is looking at in terms of the public consultation process for inventory analysis exam is, yeah, looking at how the public can influence and making sure that they're a part of the overall design, well, not design process, but before you get there, which is inventory and analysis. So those are some exam reflections. I'm just looking at my notes here as well. It's one thing that I will mention is, sorry, 1 second. Interestingly enough, there were a couple questions I found on historical significance or like historical preservation, which kind of does, again, go into inventory and analysis. Not major, but just something to be aware of that I wanted to throw in there, because I know when I first wrote when I wrote LARE 2, they had a few historical significant questions on there, and that kind of threw me for a loop because I was like, I wasn't expecting this. Thankfully, in it's either site analysis by LeGros or site planning design by Russ, there is a chapter or bits and pieces of some of the chapters have some information on historical preservation, just high level, and that's all you need to know. And I wouldn't even, don't like stress yourself focusing on that. I just want to let you guys know that that could possibly pop up. Might not pop up, just something to be aware of. So now moving to section 2, the breakdown of the 3 categories again. And so, you know, your site inventory, 35%, physical analysis, 40%, conceptual analysis is 25%. So again, these were taken from Carb, the breakdown of each of those 3 topics. And then from our experience when putting this together, what we found was, you know, really prominent on the exams, which we bolded. Again, what I'm saying is not guaranteed, but it's just what we experienced from my own experience and others that I've worked with on this that I'm recommending to you to look at. So again, look at all of these topics, but those, for instance, like, you know, interpret ecological analysis or determine appropriate types of analyses, or analyze codes, regulations, and permitting required for design impact. Those things have been bolded on here, and those things are topics that, you know, you might want to look a little bit more into rather than interpreting utility analysis. Again, it might be on there, but it wasn't, we didn't find that as much as, say, perform circulation analysis. So those are some of my tips for that. Take a review, post a question again if you have any questions. Yeah, I think that that kind of wraps up section 2. Those are my experiences and thoughts on section 2. Definitely open it up to the floor. If anyone wants to speak or type a question, I'll open up the chat now so we can look at that, and I'll leave it open to you guys for a little bit. Well, not hearing anyone speak or seeing anyone posting questions. I think we'll wrap that up. I hope this is helpful, and, you know, definitely throw something in the comment section if you think I'm going too fast on things, or if you want me to explain a few other things. I'm happy to do that. I will, as I mentioned before, kind of confess that it's been a little bit of time since I've done these or written the exam, so I'm a little rusty on the information in terms of more detailed information, specifically pertaining to these exams. But like what I've been talking to you is my experiences, and definitely, please, not saying I'm guiding you wrong or anything. But yeah, those everything that I just said for section 2, definitely recommend. So, again, we also have, sorry, I just thought of it. For the additional resources, we have the section 2 CLAR practice exam as well that we can distribute. That's for all the exams. I'll reiterate that once we go to section 3 and 4. It's 2013 as well, but it's beneficial. So I recommend that, and it should be on the OLA Google group. If not, let someone know or post it somewhere, and we'll make sure that you get those. Perfect. All right. Hearing none, we'll move on to section. We'll move on to section 3 now. Okay. Section 3 is design, and well, that's all it is. So now we'll look at the exam breakdown. So it's broken down into 9% is stakeholder process, 45% is master planning, and 46% is site design. So those 2 areas are really what you're going to want to focus on, and stakeholder process, want to know a little bit about, but as it says, it's only 9%. So good to have a little bit of knowledge and awareness of the stakeholder process, but you'll really want to devote your time to the master planning and site design aspects of this exam. So moving into this exam, it adds elements. So not only is it the multiple choice now, but it also adds the drag and drop feature. So it will give you diagrams for you to look at, and then it will give you things along the side that you can drag onto the screen. So for instance, they may ask you to place like a parking lot, or like a few different elements. They may ask you to place like for a recreation complex, they'll have like the recreation center on a part of a diagram with contours and things like that. You have to evaluate, and then they'll say, well, where's the best place to place the parking lot and the pool or the rec pool. So you'll have to drag and drop things like that. Or they'll have the design elements on the side, and you'll drag them over in place where you think they best should go. There's also hotspot questions, which is, so it could be 2 different ways of looking at it. They might give you 2 different diagrams, and you click on the screen which diagram you think is best, and a big red X will come up, and that means hotspot, like that you've selected that diagram versus the other one. Or they may just give you 1 diagram, and they'll say, locate this building somewhere on site, or some sort of feature like a baseball diamond or a soccer field. Where best on this site plan should it go? And then you'll click where you think it should go, and then again a big red X will come up, and that's your selection. And for those kind of questions, Carb, like in terms of that, just last one where like placing the soccer field and you select somewhere on the site plan, they'll have an area where as long as it's within that kind of boundary, they don't show you, of course, on there, but in terms of their marking, as long as it's within that boundary, you're fine. So it's generally pretty generous, as long as like some of those questions are pretty obvious. Some are a little more difficult, of course, but as long as you're not placing it like in a cluster of trees or making really any environmental impacts, you're good to go. And that's really a key for this one when thinking about design is the big thing for Carb is always public safety is your #1 goal. So as long as you're not putting public in harm, you're going to be generally right. Second is, I believe, is environmental harm. There was 3, and now I'm kind of forgetting, but those are your 2 key ones, is that you don't want to be making any negative environmental impacts, and you do not want to be #1 is putting the public at harm when doing various design questions for design. And that really goes for anything, but this really comes into effect in section 3 for design. So those are, you want to keep that in mind when looking at this exam. So with that, let's jump into the CLARB reading list. So the first one is Landscape Architectural Graphic Standards, the student version by Hopper. And I do have an image of that. Oh, that's the other one. There we go. So this is what that looks like. Again, that was one book that was that I forget which class it was for when going through BLA, but for those in Ontario, it was recommended that we get. I forget which class exactly it was, but it was that's how I got it, and I've kept it since. And I would say it's it's a great book to have and a great book to study for this exam. I found it very helpful. It's essentially like a time saver standard, which is another, and probably put the next one. Yes, it is. So that will be the next book on the list. But anyways, this is like time saver standards. It's just, it kind of, what I liked about it was there's another way to reiterate the information studying for this exam. If you already read time saver standards, or if you read this first and then read time saver standards, it's just hitting home all the information you need to study for this exam. And it also kind of gives you a little bit of a different perspective or way of looking at those design and study elements that you're studying for, just a little bit differently. The other nice thing about Landscape, this book, it gave a little bit of transit-oriented design, or TOD, which is not a massive part of this this exam, but you may find 1 or 2 questions on it. So I think there's like a small section in this book on it. So definitely recommend you take a look at this book for that reason. And then just look at the other various design aspects of this book. So that is a recommended read. I highly recommend that. It was one I did, as I mentioned. And then the next one is this, the time saver standards, which I'm sure almost everyone knows, or if not, no worries. It's like the Bible of for landscape architecture, if you will. It's a very thick book, and just an excellent resource for not only for this exam, but just for professional, just in professional practice. It's got just a ton of great information of well, standards, as I mentioned. So that is another book I recommend reading. The great thing about this book too is, as you're reading it, I don't have it right in front of me, and I'm sure it's on the, I don't know if you have a PDF of this in the Google group. There may not be, I don't know. A lot of offices have them, so you can always borrow it from there, or again, look at your local association and see if their library has it. Excuse me. The OLA has a couple copies of every book available, or that's on the LARE reading list, or CLARB reading list, I should say. So there's opportunity to take it out. But yeah, the great thing about this is that you can go through the table of contents and all those that are kind of design related, skim through. It is a dry and long read because there's so much information in there. But again, it's about the high level concepts, not knowing every little gritty detail. And at the end of each section or chapter, they have a keynote section, which really summarizes everything that you just read into the top main points. So, I mean, you could just look at those. I don't recommend that. I recommend reading the book because, you know, you're studying for a professional exam. You never know what they're going to ask in terms of detail. So it's just good to really hit home that information and really go through this. So once you've looked at that and made notes, you then can, you know, you have that information, you can then take those keynotes at the end of each section and really drill into those too. So that's another great thing about this book, is that it has that. So definitely recommend this, and everyone I know studying for this exam looked at this book, and I did too, so recommend that. And the next book, Sustainable Sites Handbook. I think this is a newer one. I did not use this book, obviously, as I'm kind of thinking about it, but I don't know if anyone else that I knew really used this book either. Again, you're more than welcome to have a look at it along with all the other books and see if there's something interesting. But I didn't use it, so I don't really have much to comment on that, unfortunately. The next one is Planning and Urban Design Standards. So it is, it looks just like the Landscape Architectural Graphic Standards. It's the same type of style of book. It's about planning and urban design standards rather than the Landscape Architectural Graphic Standards. And it really focuses on master planning. I think there's some transit-oriented design in there as well. I did not utilize it, but I know people that did utilize it, and they said that it was helpful and a good resource. So I would recommend maybe looking into that as well. Can't go wrong. And then finally, the Site Planning and Design Handbook. So this was utilized in Section 2, as we just talked about. And as I mentioned in that Section 2, the first half is really for Section 2 studying. However, the last half of it is really for Section 3. It's about design and aspects of the design. This is another book I utilized, and I recommend. It has some really good information. So for the Carb reading list, my personal recommendations would be the first two, Landscape Architectural Graphic Standards, student version, and then the Time Saver Standards, Landscape Architects, second edition, as well as the Site Plan and Design Handbook by Russ. So those are the three that I used and I'd recommend, but please take a look at the other ones and see if they may be helpful for you. Additional resources we have here are the dimensions of parking. I did not utilize this. I know a few people did, and there were some interesting aspects to it. I don't think it's key to look at this because it does focus a lot on parking, and this, while there may be some kind of questions with parking aspects in them, is not a lot of questions about solely parking. So take a look if you want, but again, it's an additional resource. It's not a critical resource. Again, the Carb practice exam from 2013 that we have. So I have it. I think it's on the OLA Google group that anyone can access on here. Just sign in, or if you're already a part, great, just go on. If not, as I mentioned earlier, send a request to be accepted. We'll accept you, and then you have full access. Or we can, get something going with Todd and Tara if you're not in Ontario. Next is the LARE prep exams, or A and B. So except for Section 1, I utilize the LARE prep exams for all the other sections, so Sections 2, 3, and 4. This one was really beneficial, or again, it was beneficial. I found it very helpful just to any practice that you can have, especially good practice, which these are, before actually writing the exam is good. So I definitely recommend them. Again, share with a friend if if you know other people that are writing. So it kind of helps cut on the cost. Again, it's probably not 15 anymore. It's more probably in 20, 25. Don't quote me. I would go and look there. I didn't have time to bring it up, and I should just go and Google that now. But rather than taking that time, I'll let you guys look at that and keep in mind it is American, so there will be conversion. And then finally, the OLA Google group and LARE Google group, the North America-wide one. Those are great resources, again, that have lots of information in there. Just pulling up the chat. There we go. Okay, so Rachel, she says the focus on the first two books, there were some questions with text boxes for drag and drop, but I couldn't recall I read these on these two books, etc. The example of a sequence of design or performance. Would you please share your study experiences on these questions? Sorry, I'm just rereading everyone. The sequence of design or performance. So that kind of question about the sequence of design or performance. And before I get into that, one thing that I would really really mention about this exam is it's difficult in the fact that it's unlike the first two, if you're writing them in order, that it's not something really, you can study for this. You definitely can study for this, and they're great resources, but it's not in terms of like section 1 where you have terms and they're specific terms. This is kind of, it's design, and there's a little bit more open-endedness to it, which is a little frustrating. However, this question here for the sequence of design or performance, I'm not sure what about the performance, but in terms of like a design sequence, I'm trying to think. I do kind of have recollection. Again, this has been a little while since I've written this one. I think it was like, I want to say like 2016 or 2017 I wrote this one. I do remember there's something about the sequence of design. You kind of had to drag and drop. Like it kind of gave you like this kind of, you had to put the sequence of design in there. That it should be in Site Planning Design Handbook by Russ. Trying to think of where I thought that would have been. I'm not sure. I guess if you've looked in the first two, Rachel, they would have. I thought they were in there, but they might not be. I know this isn't really answering your question. I really apologize. I'm not giving you a better answer. I think I would recommend taking a look at that Site Plan Design Handbook by Russ. I have a feeling like there's something in there about that. Maybe take another look at the Landscape Architectural Graphic Standards, and I don't know if they actually had something in Time Savers. They might have at the very beginning, which could be easily overlooked because that's kind of with the front end of stuff and not really design. So maybe take a look there. That would be my recommendation. And if you already have, I apologize that I'm just kind of reiterating what stuff you've already done. If that's not helpful, or if you're not still finding anything, post something to the group to see what other people are studying or looking at for those kind of questions. And if anyone on here right today is has an idea of maybe to answer Rachel's question, please feel free to send her a message or send something right to the group chat. That'd be great. I only hesitate to kind of say any real world experience because as I'm sure you all know at this point that we're talking about section 3 is real world experience is not Carb world, and when you're writing these exams, you have to think like Carb, and you have to think in terms of Carb world, and things aren't as black and white in real world, or things are a little bit different than the standard way of doing them as Carb does them, and they're very standard specific and very black and white, and it's not always like that in the real world. So I'm not sure exactly what they may be looking for, but hopefully that helps. So then Rachel also asks, do you think there are some overlapping between this section and section 2? I would say there is a bit, not a ton. There definitely is in terms of like the books. So like when you're looking at site plan design, the site analysis book as well, there are things that you can draw from section 2 onto this. I would say these two are kind of the most similar, or not similar, sorry, that's wrong to say. They just have a lot of similar books to read that kind of help influence each other. But there is a lot of, this is kind of on its own for sure. So and that's kind of, we're already been talking about the exam reflections, but I'll move into the exam reflections. One more thing. There's one other chat. I'm just waiting for it to come out. No problem. So exam reflections. So these are things that we found, me and my group that put this together, determining the knowledge, process, issues, and common activities associated for each exam question. So like, what does a competent LA know? And that kind of goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning, like, making sure you're thinking in terms of, not putting the public in harm's way or negatively impacting the environment or things like that. Emphasis on application. So in a situation where you ask me to do this, now what? Or to do X, what needs to be addressed, determined, done before or done after, etc. And I guess in terms of the process, maybe, sorry, Rachel, what you were asking before is, and there was one question I do remember on section 3 when I wrote, because unfortunately that was one exam that I did fail and had to rewrite, but there was, I forget at what point I wrote it, but there was one question where it was like a phasing question. And I don't know if this is really gonna help, but it was just, I had a way of thinking about it, and I phased it out through the drag and drop, and then I kind of explained it in the comment section, which I definitely recommend on those kind of questions that are maybe seem a little more open-ended, just to help explain what you're thinking or why you did what you did. However, I knew someone who was also writing at the exact same time, a friend of mine, and they had that exact same question. We discussed it, and she had a different way of phasing it out, which also sounded right, but she thought mine sounded right. So that's where it kind of gets a little, the ambiguity kind of comes in, and it's kind of hard because what's right, and it really comes down to what Carb thinks is right. I know that's not really answering it, but I guess thinking about to do the end goal, or they want to have this, for instance, for that phasing question, or the process of getting to this question was they wanted to have a rec facility and they needed to have a parking lot, but they also needed this or that or a trail. And so really read what Carb is they'll give a paragraph of what they're looking for, and really read through that. So to finally achieve the final thing, which is X, what needs to be addressed? So think about it in terms of that, what needs to be determined. And then, so like in terms of the final end goal, or in terms of certain things, what needs to be done before, like that final thing, but then also what needs to be done after. If you select one thing, well, what needs to be done after that? And really trying to think through that process. Hopefully that kind of helps. So those are things that you need to think of on this exam. So it's not a little bit cut and dry. There is a little bit more application and kind of your own thinking behind this, which real world experience will help you on somewhat, and where you'll want to draw from. Sections to plans and plans to sections. There's questions on that. So they'll give you a plan, and they'll have a section across, like a section line through it, and then you have to, like, it'll be almost like a topographic map, and then you have to drag and drop the what it would look like in section. Or it might even be another type of thing, like a streetscape, and you have to place some things. I don't remember getting a question like that, but there are opportunities for things like that, and vice versa. Circulation. So like I mentioned, safety, always number one concern, and that's, the public safety is always your concern. So when looking at circulation plans, there will be some of that, and like what a question will be like is, where is the greatest chance for pedestrian vehicular conflict? And that's kind of like with the circulation plan. And in a certain question, I remember it was like there was like a whole parking lot, and there were some crosswalks, but there was a drop-off point. And it was the drop-off point because people are crossing to get to the other side of the parking lot, and people are crossing there, but you also have vehicles coming through there. So that was really the point of conflict, which is also a circulation plan. So kind of things like that to think about. Grading contour signatures, I just kind of mentioned that. They don't have a ton of that because, of course, that's all on section. A lot of that is focused on section 3, but still good things to just be aware of. And know of, because that is so crucial to design. Like if you're looking at a site plan question and they're asking you to place something, and if you don't know your gradient and contour signatures very well, then you may place something somewhere that's incorrect. So just be aware of those things. Accessibility is a big one in this exam. So max slopes, drop-off points, or zones, things like that. So look into accessibility, which is talked about in RUS, as well as graphic standards and time saver standards. Determining site opportunities and constraints is another thing that was found on the exam. And as I mentioned, way above, transit-oriented design. It's not a massive question, or you won't find a ton of them, but you might find 1 or 2 questions on them, and they're higher level, so they're not really detailed questions. Again, you'll find those kind of questions or answers or topic, and then the topic in Landscape Architectural Graphic Standards, the student edition. You'll find it in there. You'll also find it in the Planning and Urban Design Standards 1, 2. So the first one, and then the fourth one. And finally, overall master planning technique, which again you'll find in this planning. From what I've heard, I didn't look at it. You'll find it in Russ's book, as well as graphic standards, and somewhat in time saver standards. So just thinking of that, and that kind of goes maybe with like the phasing and just thinking overall master plan. So then moving on into the kind of breakdown again, won't really dive into these, but there's the stakeholder process, the master plan, the site design. So then we've taken what Carb wrote as all the topics pertain to each of these 3 sections, and then we bolded what we thought really came up on the design, or exam, sorry, excuse me. So for instance, so actually going back to what you asked before, or what was asked, is there crossover? Yes, there is. If you see here, the performing site analysis and determining opportunities and constraints. So taking that information that you learned in section 2 about, site analysis, you can really apply that information in section 3. So there is a little bit of overlap, as I mentioned. Other things like developing design guidelines, or site master plans, land use plan, basis for design, developing schematic designs. There are certain questions like that. On this design or exam, sorry, you'll find some lighting questions. You don't need to really study for lighting. The only thing that you really need, the types of questions that I found that pertain to lighting, were that they'd give you a plan, and you had like various illumination circles on the side. Like one was really small, one was large, medium, and then one was really large. And then they had like a row of lights that showed some various lighting outputs, and then you had to drag and drop in the areas that were unlit to light them. But then there was a constraint, I think, on the question saying you can't have light spillage onto the adjacent residential property, because that would be affecting them, and you don't want that. So those are the types of lighting questions you'll find, which are pretty self-explanatory in terms of reading the question and figuring it out, and then not really having to just be aware of them. You don't have to necessarily look at like lumens and a ton of things regarding lighting in terms of that. So there's another thing to be thought of. I'm going to look at my section 3 here to see if there was any kind of thing to look at. I already talked about the transit-oriented design. They'll talk about design. Yeah, so the design phases, like what is included at each step. So just, again, I think at the beginning of each of those kind of design standard books, they talk a little bit about the processes. So just look there maybe. And then Russ, I believe, talks about that as well. I remember there was some stuff on roof deck design, but not like you didn't have to design it. They had like a detail of it, and then you had to, I think, hotspot something on it. I know that's not really helpful, but just some things to be aware of. Again, there was a little bit on historical preservation, so whatever you kind of studied for section 2, just kind of maybe refresh that for section 3 and you should be fine. Yeah, so, and then, you know, when designing, be aware of environmental impacts and trying to make the least amount of impact as possible. And they'll generally mention that in their questions, but it's just, again, it reiterate and make sure you always think about, first is pedestrian safety and second is environmental, the reduction of environmental impacts as much as possible. So I think that kind of sums up all my kind of my experiences from section 3 and what I would recommend when studying and what to look at. Again, I hope that was helpful. I'll open it up to the floor. If anyone has any questions, feel free to speak your mind or ask any questions. I'm happy to answer hopefully as much as possible. And if not, we'll pose it to one of the forums and see if we can get an answer for you. All right, hearing none. Hopefully this is a good thing that there's not really much discussion going on or anything like that. I hope I'm answering questions or at least providing some help to this. But if everyone's good on section 3, we can move on to we'll move on to section 4 now then. All right, so section 4, the final layer, and as many people call it, kind of the beast of the 3. I don't know if actually people say that, but they definitely generally think of this as like the hardest one, and they're not quite wrong. They all definitely have their own quirks and difficulties, but this one is fairly hard, but it's not insurmountable. And as long as you really study and look at things and make sure you're well prepared, you'll be fine. So this one again, like section 3, has all aspects of it has the multiple choice and multiple answer, but it has hotspot and drag and drop kind of questions as well. So it kind of has the whole has everything included in this exam. So the exam breakdown is 20% for site preparation plans, 40% for general plans and details, 25% for specialty plans, and 15% for specifications. So with that, we'll jump into the Carb reading list. So the first one is, once again, the Landscape Architectural Graphic Standards, the student version. I found that really helpful because utilizing it for section 3, there are aspects of section 3 that you can take from it. Not a ton. What I really found it helpful for was the diagrams for stormwater management, which there is a good chunk of stormwater management aspects to this exam, which you'll want to study and really make sure you know well. One of those things being the various diagrams for various storm ponds, whether it be dry pond, wet pond, retention, detention kind of ponds, and there's a lot of similarities between them, but there's a lot of differences as well, and knowing those key aspects in terms of the diagram. So the graphic standards has all those diagrams, which I recommend reviewing, even drawing it yourself. I know I did and other friends did as well. That definitely helps, because in the exam, you will be required to label one of those diagrams. They'll have a diagram up on one of the questions, and they'll have a bunch of the terms on the side that identify the features or aspects of the pond, and you'll have to place them in the right locations, identifying those key aspects of them. And it's essentially what you're reviewing in this book, in the graphic standards, or in the time saver standards, or in the site engineering book, which we'll get to in a second. And then they just have other good information regarding stormwater management, or not so much specifications, but site preparation plans and general plans and details. There's lots on details which you'll want to know. Kind of standard details, knowing general things about standard details is good, like in terms of like tree plantings or, you know, different types of pavements. Those are good to know. So yeah, so definitely recommend that book. I utilized that book and found it very helpful. The next one is Site Engineering for Landscape Architects, and it looks like this book. So there's two versions. This is the 5th edition, which I have, perhaps some of you have. However, this is the latest edition, the 6th edition. This is the most recent one out, so it is different looking. Really, there's no difference between the books. I think it's just they might add a bit more ad stuff, but it doesn't affect your studying for this. So if you have one or the other, fantastic. And this is probably the main book you want for this exam. This is the book for this exam to really look over, because it has so much on, first off, site engineering and grading, that's what this exam is about, but it also has a lot on the stormwater management aspects, which is featured in this exam quite prominently. And it also has diagrams in it as well. So it really hits home those diagrams and those aspects of the various topics. So this is a key book, and I utilize this. So definitely recommend it. So is that Sustainable Sites Handbook by Calkins. I did not utilize this book. I don't know if it's a newer one or what not, and I'm not sure if I have if any of my friends who wrote in past exams had utilized this book or not. Feel free to take a look at it, like I mentioned for any of the other recommended reading list books on the previous exam session. But take a look. I'm sure it does have some helpful stuff in there. I can't speak to it because I didn't review it. Again, time saver standards, just like the architectural standards, it has a ton of information about details and various things like that, as well as the stormwater management pond. So it really drives home those studying aspects. So another great resource, which I utilized as well, and I would recommend. And finally, the Landscape Architects Portable Handbook, which I do have. I utilized a bit for this, but really only because it's essentially time saver standards in, oh, I actually have it here. So this is what it looks like. It's really small, but yeah, it's a helpful book. It really has everything that's kind of in time saver standards. Just very condensed, and say you're, I don't know, on the bus and you don't want to take the time saver standards with you, which is completely understandable because it's very heavy and big. You can take that and do some studying while you're on your commute to, you know, if you're transiting to work, or if you have some time at lunch and you want to study it rather than, I know you don't really want to, no one really wants to study maybe on their lunch or whatnot, but definitely when you're prepping for this, for any of these exams, especially for this exam, but really all the exams, you need to really put your nose to the grindstone and really get studying for these. So anyways, it's just another book to help review things. So not critical, but if you have access to it, there's no harm in it for sure. Moving on to the additional resources, the C.Dot Pocket Guide, which is available on the OLA Google group, and it's just a PDF. You can also Google it online, and I just Googled it before we did this session, or like the overall session at 11:30 when we started, and this is what it looks like. Oh, that one. So this is what it looks like. It's 2019 So it's brand new. I think it's the same. It looks different than the one I utilized while studying. But it looks like it appears to have all the important things in it that you'll want to review. And while it is for Colorado, it still has like erosion control and stormwater quality, or well, let's look at the top. Perimeter control, exposed areas, slopes, ditches, inlet, outlet protection, sediment traps, pollution prevention, and special conditions. So all of those things are aspects that you will find on this exam and good things to review. And they really touch on the key aspects of those in this guide. So I utilized it, and I know a lot of other people utilize it as well. Of course, if it is specific to Colorado, disregard it, but it's really generalized and applicable really to anywhere, and especially for this exam. So a great resource, and I definitely recommend utilizing this one as well. So again, just type in CDOT Pocket Guide, and you'll find a PDF of it right there on Google. But if you can't for some reason, we do have a copy of it in the OLA Google group for everyone to utilize. So there was that. Other additional resources, the Carb 2013 practice exam. Again, as I mentioned for the other sessions or the other exams, we do have it available. It is on the the study group, the Google group, or we can make sure it's available to you if you get in contact with Todd or Tara or anyone in terms of your association. So we'll make sure you get access to that, because while it is a little older, as I mentioned before, relevant information, very useful and helpful, and I utilized it. I think it's great. Everyone I know has utilized them, so definitely recommend. And again, the LARE preps. I'll recommend these once again. I found it very beneficial for this exam. It was helpful in terms of writing one, like, so how I found, and I guess maybe I should have said this for every time, but when I'm writing for, like when I'm preparing for an exam, or when I did, I would generally study really everything and then take one of these exams, see how well I was doing, where my strengths and weaknesses were, and where I, was doing well. I knew I knew it, so I didn't focus on it as much. And then the areas that I didn't do so well on, I really focused on those areas and really improved. So then, right before the exam, but as you're approaching the exam, I took the other exam, the B, for instance, and to see where I was at. And generally, you've definitely improved. And then you're just, from there on till the exam, you just you're looking over everything and really studying. So that's what I found helped. Of course, do what feels right for you. I know some people who they will write the exam right at the get-go, even before studying, so they know where their strengths and weaknesses are, because they may have some prior knowledge on certain aspects of these exams, which, hey, if that works for you, fantastic. I mean, I don't see any issue with that. So you're writing one, then you're studying, and then you're writing one right towards the end, and then you're ready for your exam. But again, I think these exams are helpful just because it's another great tool to study and practice for these exams. And then it also gives you explanations as to why, if you got a question wrong, why you got it wrong, and why the right answer is right, and like why it is. So yeah, definitely recommend those once again. And finally, again, the OLA Google group and the LARE North American Google group. We at the OLA have great information on there for you to utilize. And then the overall North American, you can draw from so much more, because people are posting what their experiences were, or tips and tricks that they found. So yeah, definitely look into those two. And then again, I'll reiterate what Todd put at the beginning of the chat, those links for people to start, utilizing to put, if they have questions or want to help out other people because they're like, hey, I found this helpful, please utilize it. So I think we'll start utilizing those for Canada-wide between our associations. I think that's great too. Moving on to the exam reflections. So these are some of the reflections, again, that we found. these are just our recommendations, what we found. These aren't, necessarily what you may experience on the exam, but there are definitely good chances you will. Stormwater management, detention versus retention, or be able to label the features and functions of those various stormwater management features or ponds and whatnot. Sediment and erosion control, types of control, what to use them for, where to locate them. They'll ask a lot of questions about those kind of things too. So make sure you know those. And before I continue going further, again, you want to know a good chunk of this information, but you don't necessarily have to know the nitty-gritty of everything. I mean, you'll drive yourself insane trying to know every single little detail. So as long as you know the general concepts and the high level of everything and some of the more important details for these exam reflections, that'll really help you. Come on, chat. Here we go. So Todd just posted, Sarah wanted to know, and also my question about Exam 4 was about how much technical info will be expected to know off the top of our heads about fasteners, lumber, and other assembly materials versus how much will be in an exhibit type reference. That is an excellent question. I've heard a lot of different things. My personal experience was this was not a big thing on the exam. I think the most I had to know about kind of like fasteners and lumber was, so for instance, like lumber, there was an image of a deck, and then it would ask me what was the fascia, and I had to hotspot it. I had to click on the diagram where the fascia was, and of course that's the outer boarding of the deck, just beneath the deck boards, and so you click on that. So that was kind of my experience with that kind of in terms of lumber. I don't recall, and I'm trying to think if other of my friends mentioned much in regards to kind of lumber. In terms of fasteners, I think there was, I think they showed an image of either a fastener, I think it was some sort of kind of like leg bolt. And it was a bolt of some sort, and it had like leg bolt, carriage bolt, and all those kind of things, and you had to know which it was. But again, it was not prevalent. It's not a huge aspect. So I definitely recommend looking over because they have some of those things in the time saver standards. So definitely look that over. But I wouldn't stress or spend tons of time reviewing those things because it's not, I wouldn't say it's that critical. It's a very small aspect of the whole overall exam. I mean, only being one or two questions, it's not that bad. So definitely recommend looking it over in the books and taking a bit of time to maybe have an idea of what you're up against in terms of some of those fasteners. But you don't need to know every little thing about lumber, nominal, and things like that, or assembly materials. I do remember looking at a little bit of like concrete slump tests and things like that. Definitely know what some of those concrete tests are because they will ask those. Again, it's not a ton of questions on those things, but it's good to know what a concrete slump test is and what it does and a few things like that. I'm in time savers, there is a section on, paving and then concrete, and they have those explanations. And if it's still not making sense, sometimes it's just as easy to YouTube or Google what a slump test is, and they'll have a video of them doing a slump test. I remember I did that. I went and Googled what a slump test was, and they did it right there in front of me. And I know I'm sometimes more of a visual learner in those aspects, so that was, as soon as I saw that, it made like a ton more sense than reading about it, or just things like that. So there is opportunities, and when it comes to a little bit more of a tangible or physical kind of aspect, like a slump test or a fastener or lumber, doing a little bit more Googling, aside from looking at the time saver standard things, definitely is beneficial. I would recommend. So hopefully that helps. So then moving on with the other exam reflections, contours, being able to understand their signature. They will, that kind of stems from knowing that in section 3 when doing the design, but this a little bit more. I'm just looking at what I wrote about that, if I wrote anything about that. Sorry about that, guys. I do have a note here for myself on the exam. I wrote that other than that, those two questions, I had nothing else on bolt or decking. So it was very, very not a big thing. So in terms of the contours, you'll want to know things about, their signatures, maybe like where the high and low points are. Make sure you know your grading, which you'll read and know through experience, but then also through that site engineering book is very helpful for that. Knowing like a hotspot of a saddle point on a plan, things like that. So then moving on, specs. Know the different kinds of specs there are. Performance specs versus other types of specs, and which one book you'll want to look back at is from section 1, construction contracts by Jimmy Hines. Take out your notes from section 1 and review some of those things, or just if you can obtain the book once again, take a look at it. I think I did that. I actually did take out section 4, the construction contracts by Jimmy Hines for section 4, just to reiterate it, because it had been some time between writing section 1 and passing and taking section 4. So that has spec information and other construction admin things in it, because there is a little bit of that to this exam. Order of construction, process of what occurs and when. That again you'll find in construction contracts. That is important to know. Details, so mostly paving related, which I did talk about a little bit earlier. Which you'll find those details in the graphic standards as well as time saver standards. You'll want to just know concrete paving, unit paving, asphalt paving, kind of know like those kind of details. I remember there was some detail versus, I think there was like rigid paving versus flexible paving, I think were the two, like knowing what each of those are and like their differences and like pros and cons and things like that. So do you know those? I'd recommend. Being able to read and understand them, because the other alternative to being able to know the information behind those is that they also will either they'll show you the detail and then you'll have to label it with the labels on the side, just like how you labeling the diagram of the storm pond. Or alternatively, you may have to select the proper detail out of a bunch. Like they may have 4 details on there, and they may say, hey, choose one that is rigid paving, or choose all that are rigid paving, or all those that are flexible paving. And then they'll give you a bunch of different ones, and you'll have to select which ones are applicable. Which plan? Oh, so this is a typing error, but this should have said which plans show which information. So, topography versus, your grading plans versus your layout plans versus planting plans. That's what they're talking about there. Contract administration and specs, just like I said, review from section 1, bidder order, what is a project manual, things like that you'll find from Jimmy Hines' book. And just your notes in general. Taking a look at those is really helpful for this exam. It's not like this is all the exam is going back to section 1, but it's just good to have a refresher and know that information for some of these questions that will pop up on section 4. Dimensioning systems, stationing, coordinates, performance, things like that. Know those kind of things, which again you'll find in your site engineering book. They have sections on those to talk about that, so definitely review that. And finally, irrigation systems. When to use them, what is to be considered. So it's not, again, this is kind of one that you'll want to know about. There's various types of irrigation versus, you know, just trying to think, there's like spray, drip. There's a few different types of irrigations. I'm blanking on them, of course. But it's good to know those and what each of them, the pros and cons for each of those are, and when they should be utilized, because they'll ask questions regarding those kind of things. It's also good to know, and which you'll find in both time savers and I know for sure it's in graphic standards, the diagram of an irrigation system or a typical one. You'll want to know that, and they will ask a question on that, or at least in my experience they did, and others that I know they experienced that as well. Another exam reflection I'll add to this is I remember getting a question regarding like construction road signs, which I know sounds odd, and I don't know why that should be on there, but it was, and it was like a diagram of a road coming to a T intersection, and then there was on the side of the screen there were a bunch of different signs that you had to place throughout that essentially told drivers that they were coming up to a road that was closed due to construction. They had to be detoured. There isn't there was some, I'm failing on what it is. There was one document, and you will find it in the OILA Google group, that talks about, that kind of talks about this, these construction road signs and things like that. It's an American document, but it's still generalized and helpful to just kind of take a look through. Again, this question wasn't, this was like the only question on there. There might have been one other, but I think that was the only question. And it's not all over the exam. It's not like you have to massively study for it, but it's just, I want you guys to be aware of it, because I wasn't aware of it when I went into the exam. And when I came across this question, it kind of threw me for a loop. It was like, I didn't study for this. Like, what the heck is this? But it's pretty logical. You just kind of look at the diagram, look at the signs that they posted, and look at the description or the questions that they've asked, and just kind of think it through. I can't tell you if I got it right or wrong, because I can't see the exam results, so I don't know if I got it right or wrong, but I passed it, so the overall exam. But anyways, that's just one kind of question that I thought I would throw in here as an exam reflection for people to be aware of too. I'm just taking another, and why I kind of maybe have a little bit more information for this one is that this is the last one I wrote. I wrote it in September of 2018. So it's a little bit fresher for me, I guess you could say. So I have quite a bit of notes on this, since it was such a big exam, and I wanted to make sure I took a bunch of notes for myself after I wrote the exam, which is something that I don't know if it might help you. I know after every exam, except for the first one I did and I failed it, after I finished, I was talking to another friend of mine who failed, and they said after they finished their exam, they wrote everything that they could think of that was difficult to them. And they didn't need to utilize it again, thankfully, but it's a helpful tip that I found, that say you don't pass, you then have you then have an idea of where you might have struggled, and then you can look back on those notes when you go back to study to pass it the second time. I know that's the last thing you want to do when finishing a big exam. You feel like your brain is mush, but I definitely recommend, if possible, when you get out, grab a pen and paper and just jot anything and everything that you remember from the exam. And even if you don't utilize it, and you pass and you don't utilize it, at least you have it there, and then you might be able to pass it on to another friend later on that's going to be taking the exam. So that's another recommendation that I found helpful for myself, which is the notes I'm looking at right now, actually. So sorry, I'm just kind of taking a quick look through some of these. I think everything that I've kind of talked about right now is, there were no, I know some people, this kind of goes with the material questions. I did not get a single question on rebars. Not to say that you won't, you may, but I did not really study that. I think I might have looked at the other things, but everyone that I knew didn't have rebar, so I don't think you need to worry about that. Yeah, the traffic detour routes that I just talked about. Oh, no retaining walls. I remember there were some things about retaining walls. And you'll see these in some of the practice exam questions, which will help you review. But looking at the types of retaining walls there are, and then retaining wall failures and why they failed, or what would cause them to fail. So those are things to review. Or I found there was a couple questions on the exam about that. Yeah, I think that kind of sums up a lot of this. That's kind of exam reflections. Again, as I mentioned for the other three, the final page of this document is just the site preparation plans, general plans and detailed specialty plans and specifications. And then those bolded are the ones that we found were more prevalent than others. So yeah, just take a look and have a review. And if you have any questions, again, always feel free to post something in any of these kind of links to either the OLA Google group or even the North American Google group. There's, you can look into that as well, as I mentioned, or post anything there too, or these chats that Todd has created. So, anyways, yeah, I think that kind of wraps up what I think is some key aspects for Section 4. I hope that's been helpful. I'll open it up to you guys once again. If you have any questions, please feel free to chime in now. And if you don't, that's fine. If you get studying, you can always ask questions later on too. This isn't the only opportunity. It's just me giving some of my thoughts from my experiences, and hopefully it's been beneficial. So. All right. So with that, I think that pretty much wraps up. Everything. I'm not hearing anything or seeing anything in the chat about any other questions. So again, hopefully this has been helpful for everyone. I'm always available if any questions. To help answer any questions, I should say rather. Or if I can't, I'll find someone that can. And again, the Google group is always very helpful for those kind of aspects, for helping each other, and someone will know something. So again, thank you very much for tuning in today. I hope it's been helpful. I know we ran a little bit longer, almost an extra hour longer than we anticipated, but I think it was quite. Hopefully it was beneficial. So I guess I don't know if Todd has anything to say, but I guess I'll just kind of leave it there and hope everyone has a great Saturday. And I wish you all the best on your studies and writing the exam, and wishing you all the best for passing.
No, I don't have anything to add to that really, other than to say thank you to Justin for toughing it out and putting in all the extra time. And to those of you that sort of toughed it out and stuck with us for the whole session is really, really great. I will just double check a couple things and probably post this. The Telegram groups, some of the stuff that Justin was pointing out, I was able to find in my email archives. And so some of it I've already posted into those Telegram groups. Plus, I attended the ASLA prep sessions the last couple of years, and some of those resources I posted as well. So the Telegram lets you post almost any file type, so you'll be able to find all sorts of stuff in there. But thank you again to Justin and all of you for hanging out, and have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd, and thank you, everyone. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks.